My name is Vortal Kaysen, and I am the reason 12 warships burned above a world called Meridian 6. I am the reason 11,000 humans stopped breathing on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I am the reason the Draelith Dominion, the most feared military force in this arm of the galaxy for 11,000 cycles, no longer exists as it once did. And I am writing this because every species that picks up this signal needs to understand one thing before they do something as foolish as I did. Do not touch the humans. Do not provoke them. Do not test them. And above all else, do not make them remember your name. I was the senior intelligence arbiter of the Draelith Dominion. That title meant I was the one who decided which species were worth worrying about, and which ones were not. For 30 cycles, I had never been wrong. My assessments had guided the Dominion through 6 successful conquests, 3 border disputes, and the quiet absorption of 2 entire civilizations that no longer exist, because I told the Council they were not a threat if we struck fast enough. I was very... And then my scouts found Meridian 6. It was a nothing world. A small rocky planet on the far edge of human expansion, barely worth cataloging. Roughly 80,000 humans lived there. They grew food. They raised families. They had a handful of old patrol ships in orbit, and a communications relay that could reach their homeworld in about 14 hours if nothing went wrong with the signal chain. By every measure I had ever used, this was the softest target I had ever seen. It was almost insulting how easy it looked. I pulled every piece of data we had on the species called Homo sapiens. Their biology was underwhelming. No natural armor. No venom glands. No electromagnetic sense. No redundant organs. They could not see in the dark. They could not survive in vacuum for more than a few seconds. Their bones broke easily. Their skin tore easily. They needed to sleep for a third of every rotation cycle or their brains started shutting down. Compared to a Draelith warrior, a human being was a walking collection of design failures, held together by stubbornness and thin skin. Their technology was slightly better than their biology, but not by much. Their ships were a full generation behind ours. Their weapons were loud, crude, and inelegant. Their defensive systems were scattered and inconsistent. Nothing like the layered shield networks that protected Draelith space. I remember sitting in my office aboard the command vessel Silence of Worlds, reviewing the final assessment, and thinking that this would barely qualify as a military operation. It was closer to collection. We would take what we needed and leave before their central government even knew we had been there. I presented my analysis to the Dominion Council on a quiet morning. 12 council members, each one a veteran of campaigns that had reshaped the map of known space. I showed them the biological comparisons, the technological gap, the strategic isolation of the colony. One council member, a sharp-eyed commander named Vreth Kaolin, actually made a sound that in our language is the equivalent of a dismissive laugh when I showed the comparative anatomy charts. They do not even have backup hearts, she said. What happens when the first one fails? They stop functioning, I replied. The council approved the operation without a single voice of dissent. Fleet Commander Raul Doventus was given 12 warships for the task. 12 was excessive. 4 would have been enough. But the Dominion believed in sending a message, even when no one was watching. And Raul was the kind of commander who preferred to arrive with more force than any situation could possibly require. I stood on the observation deck of the Silence of Worlds as we dropped out of fold space above Meridian 6. The planet was blue and green, wrapped in thin white clouds, spinning slowly against the black. It looked peaceful. It looked harmless. It looked exactly like the kind of world that exists to be taken by someone stronger. The operation began at what the humans would call 3 in the afternoon, local time. Their patrol ships responded within minutes. I will say this for them, they did not hesitate. 4 small vessels against 12 Draelith warships, and they came straight at us without a moment of delay. It was the response of creatures who did not understand the mathematics of their own situation, or who understood it perfectly and simply did not care. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. We disabled 3 of their ships, and the 4th retreated into the atmosphere, trailing smoke. The strikes were precise, the relay went dark, the administrative buildings collapsed, and then the ground teams deployed. I monitored the operation from orbit, watching the data streams roll across my screens. There was resistance on the surface. Small groups of humans with personal weapons, fighting from buildings and tree lines, and anywhere else they could find cover. They were disorganized. They were outgunned. And they kept fighting long past the point where any rational calculation would have told them to stop. I remember watching one feed from a ground team leader who reported that a group of humans had barricaded themselves inside a food storage facility and refused to come out even after being told they were surrounded. They held that building for 6 hours before the team leader finally decided it was not worth the effort and moved on. The entire operation took 4 hours from start to finish. We secured the bio-reserves, the mineral deposits, and enough genetic samples to fill our libraries for a decade. Casualties on our side were negligible. Casualties on theirs were not. When the reports were compiled and the fleet withdrew to fold space, I sat down and wrote my after-action assessment. Recommend no further monitoring. It was the natural order of things, and I had no reason to believe that this time would be any different from the hundreds of times before. I was wrong, and the depth of how wrong I was is something I am still measuring, because every time I think I have reached the bottom of my error, I discover that it goes deeper. 3 cycles passed. In Draelith terms, that is a long stretch of nothing. We had moved on to other operations, other assessments, other corners of the galaxy that required the Dominion's attention. Meridian 6 was a closed file, in a cabinet full of closed files. I had not thought about humans in weeks. Then Outpost Vrenna went silent. Vrenna was a mining station on the edge of our territory, far from any contested space. It processed rare minerals from an asteroid belt and shipped them back to the core worlds on a regular schedule. It had a crew of 40, a standard defensive array, and absolutely no strategic importance to anyone, except the accountants who tracked our resource output. When it missed its scheduled communication window, the monitoring office flagged it as a technical fault and dispatched a patrol ship to investigate. The patrol ship arrived to find Outpost Vrenna completely intact. The hull was undamaged. The systems were running. The crew was alive. Every single one of them. But unconscious. They had been sedated with a compound our medical officers had never seen before. Something that put them into a deep sleep without causing any lasting harm. Every piece of data storage on the station had been wiped clean. Not corrupted, not damaged, but erased with a precision that suggested whoever did it knew exactly what they were looking for and exactly what they wanted to remove. It was crude, roughly cut, and laser-etched with a set of coordinates. Our navigation team ran the coordinates through the system, and the result came back in seconds. It was not fear, not yet. It was confusion. Genuine, complete confusion. Meridian 6 was over 9 relay jumps from Outpost Vrenna. The humans did not have the ships for that kind of deep space operation. They did not have the navigational data to find Vrenna. They did not have the technology to sedate 40 Draelith crew members simultaneously without triggering a single alarm. None of this was possible according to my assessment. I flagged the incident as an anomaly and requested additional monitoring of the border sectors, but I did not change my assessment. I told myself it was an isolated event, perhaps a rogue crew, perhaps mercenaries using human markings as a false flag. The alternative, that I had fundamentally misjudged the species, was not something I was ready to consider. 2 weeks later, a supply convoy disappeared. 6 transport vessels carrying fuel and materials from the outer ring to the core fleet staging area. They entered a relay corridor and never came out the other side. When search teams swept the corridor, they found nothing. No debris, no distress signals, no energy residue from weapons fire. The ships were simply gone, as if the corridor had swallowed them whole. Then Outpost Draven went dark. This time, the crew was not sedated. They were gone. Removed. Every living being on the station had been taken, and in their place was the same crude metal plate, with the same coordinates etched into its surface. The station itself had been stripped of its navigational charts, its communication encryption keys, and its patrol schedule database. Everything else was left untouched. Then a Draelith diplomatic courier was intercepted in neutral space. The ship was stopped, boarded, and held for exactly 90 minutes. The passengers, 3 diplomatic staff and their security detail, were not harmed. They were seated in the ship's common area and given water while someone, they never saw who, accessed the ship's communication archive and copied everything. Every message, every encrypted file, every diplomatic brief from the last 2 cycles. When the intruders left, they restored the ship's engines and navigation and departed without a word. The diplomatic staff reported that the intruders communicated with each other in short, clipped phrases in a language the translation system identified as Human Standard English. One of the security officers managed to glimpse a shoulder patch on one of the intruders before they disappeared back into their own vessel. The 2 words were never forget. That was when I requested a full intelligence deep dive on humanity. Not the summary file I had used for the Meridian 6 briefing, not the quick reference biological profile, but the complete archive, everything our scouts and researchers had ever recorded about this species going back decades. It took me 3 days to read through it all. Most of it confirmed what I already knew. Fragile biology, crude technology, short lifespans, emotional decision-making. Nothing in the first several hundred pages changed my initial assessment in any meaningful way. Then I found the note. It was buried in a subfile, a single entry from a xenoanthropologist named Scholarly Vreth Hallen, who had spent 2 cycles observing human behavior from a concealed research post near one of their inner colonies. Her work had been filed as low-priority academic material, the kind of thing that intelligence arbiters like me never bothered to read. Her note was 3 lines long, and it changed everything. They do not overpower it, they follow it. They track it across any distance, any terrain, any condition. They exhaust it, and they do not stop until it falls. I read that note 4 times, then I sat very still for a long time. We were not dealing with a rogue crew. We were not dealing with mercenaries or pirates or a lucky strike force. We were dealing with a species that had built its entire evolutionary history around one single principle: chase, follow, outlast, never, ever stop. It was not a diplomatic overture or a threat of force. It was a list of names. Every Draelith officer who had been involved in the Meridian 6 operation, from Fleet Commander Rael Doventus down to the lowest-ranking ground team member. Their full names, their ranks, their current postings, their home nest locations, their family structures, their daily routines. My name was on the list. My home nest address was on the list. The school where my offspring studied was on the list. We know where you sleep. Fleet Commander Ral, who had led the assault on Meridian 6 with the confidence of someone swatting an insect, stared at his own name on that list, and I watched his skin change color in a way that our species only does when we are experiencing genuine, primal alarm. How, Vreth Kaolin asked. How do they have this information? I told her I did not know. And for the first time in my career, I told the council that my original assessment had been wrong. I told them that we had made an error. Not a small error. Not a tactical miscalculation. A fundamental, catastrophic misunderstanding of what we were dealing with. The council listened. Some of them believed me. Most of them did not. Most of them still thought that a species with no natural armor and only one heart could not possibly pose a real threat to the Drelith Dominion. They would learn. They would all learn. The human campaign did not begin with a grand offensive. There was no fleet formation, no declaration, no single dramatic moment where the balance of power shifted. It began with small things, quiet things, things that happened in the dark, in the gaps between our patrols, in the places we thought no one could reach. A fuel depot on the edge of the Quran system went offline when its main reactor was remotely shut down by a program no one had installed. A navigational beacon in the Draith corridor began broadcasting false coordinates, sending 3 of our patrol vessels on a loop that took them 4 days to recognize and correct. A supply cache hidden inside an asteroid was found empty, its contents replaced with a neatly stacked pile of Drelith military ration containers, each one opened, emptied, and cleaned, as if someone wanted us to know they had been there, had eaten our food, and had left at their leisure. Each incident was small. Each one was precise, and each one taught the humans something new about how we operated. They were not attacking us, they were studying us, learning the rhythms of our patrols, the frequencies of our communications, the weak points in our supply chains, the blind spots in our sensor networks. Every incursion was a lesson, and the humans were very fast learners. I began tracking the pattern from my office aboard the Silence of Worlds, pinning each incident to a galactic map and watching the picture form. It was not random, it was methodical, systematic, almost academic in its precision. They were mapping us. Not our territory, we had maps for that. They were mapping our behavior, our habits, our assumptions. They were learning how we think. Additional patrols. As if the humans had ever cared about our borders. As if borders meant anything to a species that had already appeared 9 relay jumps inside our territory without being detected. The first real strike came 4 months later, and it was not what any of us expected. A Drelith garrison had been deployed to a contested moon called Vethar, a rocky, unstable world with toxic atmosphere and constant geological activity. The garrison was there to establish a forward-listening post, 300 warriors, with full equipment and air support. It was a standard deployment. Nothing about it suggested danger. The humans sent 17 people. I have reviewed the combat records from Vethar more times than I can count, and every time I find something new that I missed before. 17 humans against 300 Drelith warriors, and the humans did not fight the way any species in our experience had ever fought. They did not form lines. They did not hold positions. They did not engage in direct confrontation at any point during the entire engagement. Instead, they used the moon itself as a weapon. They collapsed tunnels to redirect toxic gas vents into the garrison's air intake systems. They triggered controlled geological fractures that destabilized the ground beneath vehicle depots. They introduced compounds into the water purification system that did not cause harm, but made every Draelith who drank it violently ill for hours. They set acoustic devices in the rock formations that produced frequencies specifically calibrated to disrupt Draelith's sleep cycles, a frequency range they should not have known about. For 6 rotations, 17 humans turned that moon into a maze of traps, diversions, and psychological pressure. They never slept, or if they did it in shifts so short that our sensors could never confirm a period of inactivity. They appeared from one direction, struck, vanished, and appeared from another direction before the response team could reposition. Our warriors began seeing threats in every shadow, hearing movement in every seismic tremor, doubting every sensor reading, because the humans had already proven that our sensors could be fooled. He had lost a significant portion of his force, not to direct combat, but to injuries from environmental hazards, illness from contaminated water, and psychological breakdown from 6 days without proper sleep while under constant, unpredictable pressure. The humans had taken 2 casualties. 2. Both recovered. I read Korath Ven's after-action report in my quarters that evening. His final paragraph was not written in the clinical, detached language that Draelith military reports are supposed to use. It was written in the voice of someone who had experienced something that had fundamentally changed his understanding of the world. "They did not fight us," he wrote. "They managed us. The way a farmer manages a herd. We went where they wanted us to go. We reacted the way they wanted us to react. At no point during the engagement did I feel that we were making decisions. We were responding to decisions that had already been made for us." I sent this report to the Council with a red-level priority flag. The Council responded by deploying 2 full battle groups to the border region. They were going to show the humans what Draelith military force really looked like. The humans let them come, and then the humans went around them. While our battle groups sat on the border, bristling with weapons and waiting for a fight that never arrived, human teams appeared deep inside Dominion territory. They hit a communications relay hub that routed signals between 4 major fleet commands, and they did not destroy it. They modified it. They inserted monitoring programs that copied every transmission passing through the hub and forwarded it to a destination we could not trace. We did not discover this for 3 weeks. 3 weeks, during which the humans had access to every order, every report, every strategic discussion that passed through that hub. When we found the modification and shut down the hub, the humans had already moved on. They hit a shipyard support facility and replaced the calibration data for the targeting systems being installed on new vessels. The corrupted data was subtle enough that it passed every standard quality check. We only discovered it when a newly commissioned warship fired its main weapons during a training exercise and missed the target drone by a margin so large that the weapons officer thought the guns themselves were broken. We recalibrated. They adapted. We changed our patrol routes. They mapped the new ones within days. We encrypted our communications with new protocols. They broke the encryption within a week, and we only knew because they wanted us to know. Because they left a message in the decrypted channel that said simply, "Thank you for the practice." The Council brought me in for an emergency session, and demanded to know what we were dealing with. They are persistence predators, I said. They do not need to be faster than us. They do not need to be stronger. They just need to keep going longer. And they will. They will keep going until we cannot. Fleet Commander Rael slammed his fist on the table and demanded a decisive military engagement. He wanted to take the fleet to a human world and burn it the way we had burned Meridian 6. We will teach them consequences, he said. I told him that was exactly the wrong response. Burning another human world would not teach them consequences. It would give them fuel. Every name on the casualty list would become another reason to keep going, another face they would carry with them into the next engagement, the next year, the next decade. Humans did not forget their losses. They cataloged them. They memorized them. They turned them into motivation. You cannot exhaust a species that runs on grief, I said. Raal did not listen. The Council authorized a retaliatory strike against a human outpost called Breverton Station. Raal took 8 warships and reduced it to rubble. The station had been evacuated 3 days before he arrived. The humans had known he was coming. They had moved their people, taken everything of value, and left behind a single data package addressed to me personally. I opened it in my quarters with shaking hands. Inside was a complete copy of the Council's authorization for the Breverton strike, time-stamped 6 hours before the Council had actually voted on it. They had been inside our communications network for longer than we had imagined. They had heard us decide to hit Breverton and had calmly moved their people out before we arrived. The data package also contained a recording, a human voice, speaking Drelith with a slight accent but otherwise perfect pronunciation. The voice belonged to someone who identified herself as Colonel Grace Whitmore. Arbiter Kaysen, she said, we received your assessment. The one where you called us harmless. We wanted you to know that we have read it, and we appreciate the honesty. It tells us exactly what kind of mind we are working against. Overconfident, rigid, unable to adapt when the data contradicts the theory. We want you to know that we are not angry about Meridian 6. Anger burns out. What we have is something else. It is something your species does not seem to have a word for. The closest translation in your language would be patient resolve, but that does not capture it fully. We will find a way to show you. We have time. I played that recording once. I have never played it again. I did not need to. Every word is carved into my memory, like the coordinates were carved into those metal plates. Not dramatically worse, not catastrophically worse, but steadily, relentlessly, inevitably worse, like a wound that will not close and slowly drains the body of everything it needs to stay alive. Our fleet commanders began requesting transfers away from the border sectors. Requests for early retirement among senior officers tripled. Patrol crews reported difficulty sleeping, difficulty focusing, difficulty maintaining the baseline confidence that a Drelith warrior needs to function effectively. Our soldiers were not broken, not yet, but they were bending. They were starting to doubt, and for a species that has built its entire identity on the certainty of its own superiority, doubt is a kind of poison that no medical officer knows how to treat. I began to see it in the council chambers too. The arguments became sharper, more desperate. Rahl wanted escalation, others wanted withdrawal. A few, the ones I privately thought might be the smartest people in the room, wanted to talk, to negotiate, to find some way to make the humans stop before the cost became something we could not recover from. The problem was that we did not understand what the humans wanted. We understood demands for territory, for resources, for strategic advantage. Those were the currencies of every conflict we had ever fought. But the humans were not asking for territory. They were not asking for resources. They were asking for something we had never been asked for in 11,000 cycles of dominance. They were asking for accountability. And we did not know what that meant. The decision to send a diplomatic mission was not unanimous. Rahl opposed it. Vreth Kaolin opposed it. But enough council members had watched enough of their officers beg for reassignment, and enough of their outposts go dark, to understand that what we were doing was not working. The Dominion was not losing the conflict in any single dramatic way. It was losing it slowly, in 1,000 small cuts, each one too minor to justify a major response, but collectively draining us of resources, morale, and the ability to project strength anywhere else in the galaxy. Counselor Vryn was chosen to lead the diplomatic team. Vryn was old, experienced, and patient, one of the few Drelith I had ever met who actually listened before speaking. He was given broad authority to negotiate terms, including territorial concessions, reparation payments, and a formal non-aggression pact. The Council believed this was generous. The Council believed that any reasonable species would accept these terms and consider the matter closed. The meeting took place on a neutral station in the Callaway Gap, a stretch of empty space between our territory and the nearest human-controlled system. The station was operated by a third-party species called the Velori, who had no stake in the conflict and served as guarantors of safe passage for both sides. I was not present at the meeting. I watched the recording afterward. I have watched it many times since, because it is the most important conversation in the history of the Drelith Dominion, and because it is the moment when everything I thought I understood about conflict, about strength, about the way the galaxy works, was proven completely and permanently wrong. Vryn sat on one side of the table. On the other side sat Colonel Grace Whitmore, the same voice from the recording I had received after Breverton. She was smaller than I expected. Humans usually are. She had gray in her hair and lines around her eyes, and she sat very still in a way that reminded me of the deep-water predators on our homeworld, the ones that do not move until the moment they strike. Full withdrawal from Meridian 6, and the surrounding sector. Reparation payments in rare minerals, enough to fund the reconstruction of the colony 10 times over. A formal non-aggression treaty binding both civilizations for 100 cycles. Territorial concessions along 3 disputed border regions. And a public statement of regret delivered to the Galactic Council. It was, by any historical standard, the most generous peace offer the Dominion had ever made. Colonel Whitmore listened to the entire proposal without moving. When Vryn finished, she reached into a case beside her chair and took out a data tablet. She slid it across the table without a word. Vryn picked it up and activated the display. I watched his face as he read what was on it. I watched his skin change color, the same way Ral's had when he saw his name on that list. The involuntary alarm response that no amount of training can suppress. And next to the name was a photograph, and below that, another name, and another photograph, and below that, another, and another. 11,342 names. 11,342 photographs. Every human who had been lost on Meridian 6. Civilians. Children, farmers, teachers, engineers, doctors. People who had been going about their ordinary lives on an ordinary afternoon when 12 warships appeared in their sky. Each entry included a short biographical note. Not military intelligence, just personal details. Interests, accomplishments, family connections, the things that made each person a specific individual, rather than a number in a casualty report. Your minerals are not justice. We will have accountability, or we will continue. Those are the only two options at this table. First, the identification and surrender of every Draelith officer who had authorized or directly participated in the Meridian 6 operation. Every one. From the council members who had voted yes to the ground team leaders who had directed operations on the surface. These individuals would be tried under a joint tribunal, with legal proceedings broadcast to every inhabited system in the galaxy. Second, a full public acknowledgement from the Dominion Council that the attack on Meridian 6 was an unprovoked act of aggression against a civilian population, not a statement of regret, not diplomatic language designed to soften the reality, a clear, unambiguous admission of what had been done. Third, structural reforms to the Dominion's military command, including independent oversight mechanisms designed to prevent the authorization of similar operations in the future. Fourth, the complete reconstruction of Meridian 6, funded by the Dominion, and the resettlement of all surviving colonists who wished to return. Vryn stared at the list. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the same calculation that was happening in the council chamber when the recording was played back hours later. These terms were not peace terms. They were the terms of a species that had already won and was now deciding what to do with the loser. They required the Dominion to stand before the entire galaxy and admit that it had done something wrong, that it was responsible, that the strong did not have the right to take from the weak simply because they could. For a civilization that had spent 11,000 cycles operating on exactly that principle, these terms were not just demanding, they were existential. Accepting them meant accepting that everything the Dominion believed about itself was false, that strength did not equal right, that power did not equal permission, that the galaxy was not a place where the capable consumed the vulnerable, but a place where actions had consequences, and those consequences could not be outrun. Vryn asked for time to consult with the council. Whitmore nodded. "Take whatever time you need," she said. "We are not going anywhere." She paused, and then added one more sentence that I have thought about every day since. "But neither are we stopping." We will stop when there is something to stop for. Vreth Kaolin and the pragmatists wanted to accept the human demands, swallow the humiliation, and salvage what they could. A third group, smaller but growing, argued that if we simply waited long enough, the humans would exhaust themselves and settle for less. I told the third group they were wrong. I told them what I had learned over the past 2 cycles of watching human operations. Humans do not exhaust. They rotate. When one team is tired, another takes its place. When one strategy stops working, they develop a new one. When one generation grows old, the next generation picks up where they left off. They have a concept in their language called legacy, which means the things you carry forward from those who came before you. The names of the dead on Meridian 6 were a legacy. Their children would carry those names. Their children's children would carry those names. You are not fighting a campaign, I told the council. You are fighting a memory, and memories do not get tired. The council did not reach a decision. While they argued, the humans struck the Dominion's primary shipyard at Kale Vaster. The strike was coordinated across 4 simultaneous entry vectors, using a combination of electronic disruption, fast assault teams, and a series of precisely placed charges that targeted the structural supports of the construction docks, rather than the ships themselves. The docks collapsed inward, crushing the vessels under construction and rendering the entire facility unusable. The humans lost 1 ship in the assault. We lost 40% of our fleet construction capacity in a single afternoon. The message was clear, and it was the same message the humans had been sending from the beginning. Every day you wait, the price goes up. Provincial governors on the outer worlds, the ones closest to the border and most exposed to human operations, started making private contact with human representatives. They offered cooperation, intelligence, access to Dominion systems, anything that might buy them protection from the humans, and from the increasingly erratic decisions coming out of the council chamber. Military commanders in the field began refusing orders that they considered wasteful, and several senior officers sent private communications to my office stating that they would not participate in any further offensive operations against human targets. The Dominion had held together for 11,000 cycles, through a combination of military strength, shared identity, and the unshakable belief that the Drelith way was the right way, that the strong prospered and the weak served, and that was simply how the universe worked. The humans did not defeat that belief with weapons. They defeated it with a question that every Drelith officer, every council member, every provincial governor was now asking themselves in the quiet hours when no one else was listening. It came the same way the humans did everything, gradually, persistently, and with a patience that made it feel inevitable rather than imposed. Over the next 3 cycles, every council member who had voted to authorize the Meridian 6 operation was identified and located by human intelligence teams. They were not harmed. They were extracted, taken alive from their offices, their homes, their command vessels, by small teams of human operators who moved through Drelith security like water through sand. Each extraction was clean, professional, and left behind a data package containing the evidence file for the upcoming tribunal. Fleet Commander Raul Doventus was the last to be taken. He had fortified himself inside a military installation on the Dominion's core world, surrounded by 300 loyal guards and a defense grid that should have been impenetrable. The humans bypassed the defense grid by entering through a maintenance conduit that had been sealed for decades. They neutralized the guards using a combination of non-lethal gas and sonic disruptors. They found Raul in his command center, still issuing orders to units that were no longer responding. Clark's response, according to the operational record, was simple. Every species with the capacity to receive a transmission watched as the officers of the Drelith Dominion were brought before a panel of judges drawn from 7 different civilizations, including 2 humans. I watched the proceedings from my quarters aboard the Silence of Worlds, which had been placed under human escort and was no longer permitted to carry weapons. I watched officers I had served with, officers I had advised, officers whose careers I had helped build, sit in chairs designed for beings smaller than them, and answer questions about what they had done on Meridian 6. I expected the kind of spectacle that the Drelith would have staged if the positions were reversed, a public humiliation designed to break the spirit of the defeated and demonstrate the power of the victor. That is what we would have done. That is what 11,000 cycles of Dominion history told me to expect. What I saw instead was something I did not have a framework to understand. The humans gave our officers legal representation, actual advocates, trained in Drelith law and Dominion military regulations, who argued on their behalf, with genuine effort and skill. The prosecution presented evidence, detailed and meticulously documented evidence, not emotional appeals or political theater. Witnesses testified, both human and Drelith. The proceedings followed rules that both sides had agreed to in advance, and when the defense raised objections, those objections were heard and sometimes sustained. It was fair. That was the part that I could not process. After everything we had done, after Meridian 6, after all those names and all those faces on that data tablet, the humans built a system designed to be fair. Not perfect. But structured around the principle that even those who had done terrible things deserved to be judged by a process that was honest. The sentences were delivered over the course of 3 days. No one was executed. In 11,000 cycles of Drelith conquest, every enemy we had defeated had been destroyed or enslaved. Those were the only 2 outcomes our civilization recognized. The humans offered a third option that I had never considered: reform. The convicted officers received sentences of varying length, to be served in facilities jointly administered by human and Drelith authorities. The facilities included educational programs, cultural exchange initiatives, and monitored rehabilitation processes designed not to punish, but to fundamentally change how the sentenced individuals understood their own actions and their consequences. When it was read, he stood and said nothing. I knew him well enough to recognize the expression on his face. It was not defiance. It was not surrender. It was the look of someone who has just realized that the rules he spent his entire life learning do not apply anymore, and that he has no idea what the new rules are. The Dominion Council was formally dissolved 3 months after the tribunal ended. In its place, a transitional governing body was established with oversight from an independent commission that included human representatives. The Dominion's military was reduced to a defensive force. Several of our subject species, civilizations we had conquered and absorbed over millennia, were given the option of independence, and most of them took it. The Draelith Dominion did not cease to exist. That is an important distinction. The humans did not conquer us. They did not occupy our worlds. They did not impose their culture or their values or their way of life on our species. What they did was more subtle and, I have come to believe, more profound. They broke the thing inside us that made us believe we had the right to take whatever we wanted from anyone weaker than us. They did not replace it with anything. They just removed it and left the empty space for us to figure out how to fill. Some of my people filled it with anger. Some filled it with shame. Some filled it with a slow, painful process of questioning everything they had ever been taught about strength, about purpose, about the natural order of things. It happened 6 months after the tribunal, on a border world called Sethel Minor. The world had been damaged during the conflict, not badly, but enough that the civilian population was struggling with infrastructure failures and supply shortages. A human aid ship arrived without being asked. It carried engineers, medical supplies, construction materials, and food. I was on Sethel Minor conducting an assessment when the ship landed. I watched the human crew disembark and begin working alongside Draelith civilians to repair a water purification facility that had been offline for weeks. They worked for 12 hours straight, stopping only to eat and drink. They spoke to the Draelith workers through translation devices, explaining what they were doing, teaching techniques, sharing tools. She was a small woman with dark hair tied back and calluses on her hands that told me she had been doing this kind of work for a long time. Her name tag read, Lucy Bennett. I asked her a question that had been building inside me for cycles, A question I did not fully understand until the words were already out of my mouth. How can you do this? How can you help the people whose government did what we did to yours? She looked at me. She did not look angry. She did not look smug. She looked like someone who had thought about this question before, and had found an answer that satisfied her. Because the conflict is over, she said, and this is what we do after. I stood there for a long time after she went back to work. People whose leaders had authorized the destruction of her colony. People who, by the rules of every civilization I had ever studied, should have been her enemies. She did not see them as enemies. She saw them as people who needed clean water. I do not fully understand humans. I have spent the last 14 cycles studying them, analyzing them, trying to build a model that explains how a species so physically fragile, so technologically unremarkable, so biologically limited, can do what they have done. I have not succeeded. Every model I build breaks when I try to account for the combination of traits that makes them what they are. The patience and the fury, the gentleness and the relentlessness. The ability to hold a list of 11,000 names in their memory and still hand a cup of water to someone from the civilization that created that list. But I do not need to understand them to warn you about them. And so here is my warning, transmitted on every open frequency, addressed to every species in this galaxy that has the capacity to receive it and the intelligence to heed it. Do not attack the humans, not because they are the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not. Do not attack them because they are the only species I have ever encountered that refuses to let go. They do not forget. They do not move on. They do not accept a loss and calculate the cost and decide it is not worth pursuing. When you take something from them, you create a debt, and they will collect that debt across every distance, through every obstacle, past every defense, for as long as it takes. Years, decades, generations. It does not matter. The original humans who lost someone on Meridian 6 will grow old and eventually pass away. But before they do, they will tell their children. And their children will tell their children. And 100 cycles from now, Some human you have never met will know your name and the name of every person you took from them, and they will still be coming. They are persistence predators. That is what the xenoanthropologist wrote, and she was right. But she did not go far enough. They are not just persistence predators of the body. They are persistence predators of the soul. They will chase not just your fleet but your certainty. They will hunt not just your soldiers but your self-image. They will pursue not just your territory, but the idea that you had the right to take what you took, and they will not stop until that idea is lying on the ground beside everything else you thought made you strong. I know this, because I am the one who told my people the humans were harmless. I signed the report. I gave the recommendation. I used words like, no strategic concern, and no capacity for reprisal, and I believed every one of them, because the data supported them, and the data had never been wrong before. The data was wrong. I was wrong. And the civilization I served is a shadow of what it was because of my error. So listen to me now, because I will only say this once, and I will say it in the simplest terms I can manage, so that there is no possibility of misunderstanding. If you leave the humans alone, they will leave you alone. They will trade with you, they will talk with you, they will send engineers to fix your water systems, and doctors to treat your sick, and teachers to educate your children. They will be the most generous, most curious, most infuriatingly friendly species you have ever encountered. They will invite you to their homes and cook you food and ask you about your history and your culture and your dreams with such genuine interest that you will forget they are the same species that took apart an 11,000-cycle empire with 17 people and a list of names. But if you take something from them, if you hurt their people, if you burn their homes and destroy their lives, and then turn your back and walk away thinking it does not matter because they are small and soft and fragile, then you will learn what I learned. They will come for you, and they will not stop. And no amount of distance, no amount of time, no amount of force will make them stop. They will follow you with the patience of a species that evolved to chase its prey across continents, and they will outlast you with the endurance of a species that learned to run in the heat of a sun that would have burned any Draelith to ash. And when they finally catch you, and they will catch you, they will not destroy you. That is not the worst part. The worst part is that they will sit you down and show you what you did, and they will make you understand it, and then they will help you become something better. And you will have to live with that. This is my warning. Take it or leave it. But know that I was the smartest person in the room when I made my mistake, and I was still not smart enough. No one is smart enough to predict what humans will do. You can only be smart enough to not give them a reason to do it. Vortal Kaysen, former Senior Intelligence Arbiter, Draelith Dominion, transmitted on all open galactic frequencies. End of dossier.